That is, people become more aware of the environmental issues such as air and water pollution, radiations, pesticide poisoning, and other problems, and therefore they demand the federal government to take more responsibility. As a result of which, we could see that some important laws that determine how the Mississippi River is managed. For instance, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 and the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972. All these, to a large extent, has you know bring in new forms of understandings or environmental policies. So therefore, some of the resurgence which is being witnessed in the 1960s is the increase in the scientific understanding, which resulted to a much more broader research and publications. And also it leads to the increasing pressure groups such as the Greenpeace, Amnesty, or even the WWF. So therefore, there is also an increasing media attention and public interest trying to raise some of these issues. So what we also tries to have done in the past few weeks is also to look at some of the notions of environmental movement. That is how the American environmentalism, that is the growth of wilderness idea, which date back to the work of John Muir, is also perceived as the father of national park, which was an influential a naturalist and environmental philosophers who advocate the idea of preservation of wilderness, mostly concentrated in and around the United States. So Muir was also involved in some other, idea of raising environmentalism, which was not a social movement per se, but rather an attempt by some of the privileged classes to preserve a place for outdoor recreation. And we also have certain other scholars who are closely associated with this particular movement, none other than Aldo Leopold, whose work, Ascent County Almanac, also to a large extent tries to address or try to propagate the idea of a harmonious relationship to land and which is more intricate and more consequence to these notions of civilizations, and where the emergence of ecology has placed the economic biologists into a much more peculiar dialogue. So Muir and Leopold, to that extent, display the way in which there is, which also urges private landowners to promote a mix of species on their holdings, and thereby enhancing social fertility and maintaining a diverse flora and fauna. So the post-1960s again witnessed the second era of modern environmentalism, which tries to address some of the impact on the environment, particularly the contaminations of air, earth, rivers, and sea, with the use of dangerous and even lethal materials. So for the first time in the history of the world, every human being is now subjected to contact with dangerous chemicals from the moment of conception until death. So this is a quote from Curzon's Silent Spring. So therefore, modern environmentalism differs from the conservation and preservation era in two respects, because the first era more or less emphasized on the protections or efficient management of natural environment, which is the primary policy of modern environmentalism, which is based on control of population. And modern environmentalism also transformed, that is from the top bottom control by technical and managerial leaders into a bottom-up grassroots demands from citizens and citizen groups. So to that extent, Curzon's work happens to be a seminal one, and it marked the beginning of modern environmentalism. So by examining some of the ecological impacts of the use of hazardous substances that pollute both the natural and human environments, that is particularly the use of pesticides, and therefore Curzon goes on to the extent of arguing that science and technology have been effectively removed from any larger policy framework and insulated from public input and opinion. So the environmental movement differs markedly from the American social movement because it was burdened with the notions of how environmentalism is being associated with population control and is also being perceived as the anti-environment elite. So therefore, by late 1960s, many of the environmental activists began to link the destructions of the natural environment to the complex interplay of new technology, industry, political power, and economic power, and so on and so forth. And which eventually led to the emergence of third era, which is also known as mainstream environmentalism, which also led to the declarations of the Earth Day in 1970s. So the fourth era primarily consists of the grassroots environmentalism. So these notions of environmentalism, which is concentrated mostly in the global north, where we can see that there is a huge differences in terms of with that of the global south. That is the environmentalism in the global south is primarily concentrated within the debates of the ecological distribution conflicts. So therefore, there is a varieties of environmentalism. That is the environmentalism of the poor, which constitute the of the environmentalism of the South, originates as a class over productive resources, and the issues of ecology are often interlinked with the questions of human rights, ethnicity, and distributive justice. So therefore, the movement of environmental justice, which are primarily led by the poor, peasants, minorities, which are not concerned with overburdens, but with the environmental hazards and social and economic inequalities that ravage their communities. So therefore, one could see that in the environmentalism of the North, it is people like the Mark Dubois, who claim himself to be an activist, which campaigned to save the Stanislaus River in California. And on the other hand, we have Medha Patkar, who represents the environmental activists in the global north, who not only attempts to save the Narmada River, but tens of thousands of pigeons who are to be displaced by the Sardar Sarovar Dam, which is being built on the Narmada River. So therefore, there is differences in terms of the way in which environmentalism is being seen here. So the epitome of the northern environmentalism or environmentalist is quote unquote no humanity without nature, whereas the southern environmentalism is quote unquote no nature without social justice. So therefore, one could see that there is these notions of where mostly in an environmental movement in global south, which is concentrated within this idea of livelihood and sustenance. So therefore, one can possibly look at some of the works of Vandana Shiva, and also the definitions which are more or less given by Madhav Gyatgil and Ramchandra Guha, where they have, to a large extent, tried to explain and elaborate about the environmental movement and environmentalism in the global south. So I'm not going into detail of that. What we can perhaps see here is also the importance of who will constitute the actors, practices, and the issues, and what sort of ideology or ideals these environmental movement are being guided. So therefore, environmentalism of the poor is also sometimes seen out as a growing or increasing impact, which more or less grows out of distribution conflict over the use of ecological resources, which are primarily needed for livelihood. Therefore, one of the important lessons which we can perhaps highlight here is that the main source of environmental distribution or destructions in the world is the demand of natural resources, which are generated by the consumptions of the rich, whether they are rich nations or rich individuals, and then groups within nations. And the second lesson which is pointed out by the Indian journalist Anil Alarwal is that it is the poor who are affected the most by this process of these environmental disruptions. Because in many of these their works, which I have pointed out, they sort of highlighted the plights of the peasant women who have to trudge farther and further for fuel, for the earth, and the menfolk are digging deeper. And I'll come to that question which you have raised. Yeah, I have noted that. Now, conflicts sets rich against poor in the case of the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada, and how the benefits are, being, enjoyed by certain sets of people at the cost of the indigenous communities. So therefore, we could see a lot of conflict and struggles, and many of these struggles are mostly about survival, where I've also discusses about the case of the Karnataka Pulp Limited, where environmental conflict is being witnessed in the state of Karnataka. So I will not go in details of that. And we have also begun looking at some of the approaches to environment that is ecofeminism is one of them, and wherein we engage looking at some of the ecofeminist theorists, mostly Merchant, Carolyn Merchant, Vandana Shiva, Maria Mize, and then Ariel Sala, and then also including Mary Mello, which tries to look into the women-nature relationship, and where women have been subdued and controlled, and in the process they have also been suppressed in this whole distributions of resources. So before I conclude, and then some of the questions which also comes into play is how does deep ecology be applied to Dalit literature, especially how social and ecological exclusion intersects with the caste. So how deep ecology can be applied to Dalit narrative. So by Dalit narrative, if I can understand, perhaps much more relevant would be the Dalit environmentalism, which sort of explores the intersections of caste and environmental issues in India, and which also highlight how caste system disproportionately impacts Dalits and their relationship with the environment. So if you go back and try to look at deep ecology, it is an environmental ethics which sort of tries to create an alternative ways of perceiving and then change our attitudes towards the environment or nature per se. So it sort of tries to look into the notions of where we sort of rethink, reposition ourselves, that is our deep ecological thinking. So it's not so much about a form of liberating ourselves with regards to this. So thereby to discuss that or to even the think of or to thinking would apply to whether it's the literatures or the environmentalism. I don't really see much of relations, and then thereby it denotes different thing going together.
मैंने पढ़ा था डीए से चालू किया था स्टार्टिंग में मैंने भी सी प्लस प्लस से पहले चालू किया था अपने टेक पे ठीक है एंड जब मैंने चालू किया तो कम से कम
Yeah. So deep ecology in that sense is a different way of perceiving nature. That is, if one would say that it is embedded with these notions of simplicity and simple way of thinking, and thereby one also talks about where nature should be uh, not harmed to the possible extent. So therefore, I do not really see like how can we even correlate about between these notions of this idea of exclusions. But rather, if you look at some of the critiques which center around this deep ecology, because deep ecology also in some sense subscribe the idea of wilderness thinking or this wilderness idea, and there are people who suspect it to be forms of new colonialism in the third world countries, because it is also being perceived as sort of where it is being imposed on many of the colonialist the colonized countries, mostly which is perceived as the Commonwealth nation. So this the eco-feminists which I talked about, that is the ecological feminist philosophers, mostly trying to situate the structures of dominations and dominations of nature by referring to the idea of where they perceive that dominations of nature is also being concentrated within the minds of this oppressive patriarchal conceptual framework. And then in one world of feminism and environmental ethics is then to expose and then dismantle this dualism, that is to rethink and conceive those mainstay philosophical notions. So we also look into some of these feminist political ecology, how the feminist political ecologist has tried to negate the way in which women are being treated as both participants and partners in environmental preservation. So now moving on, what we have covered so far, that is one of the important theme which we have possibly looked into is the third world of ecofeminism. That is the constructions of some women in the third world as representative of difference, and then where there is these notions of dehistoricizing third world activism. And one examples of this is the portrayals of the Chipko movement in India, in which local villages have organized themselves to prevent the filling of this communal woodland for timber, sometimes by literally hugging them. So which in some sense portray and convey a strong message of in terms of their concerns for the environment to a large extent. So we have also looked into some of the environmental ethics, like deep ecology, and because deep ecology again is very much in the propagate the idea of this wilderness thinking. So if you go back to the first part of my lecture, how wilderness thinking has emerged, it tries to look into the way in which where nature is being conserved and preserved for the sake of recreations of the urban elites. So in a way, it's very much elitist in nature and in approach. So therefore, it is never a grassroots in nature. So therefore, to equate or even to think of the deep ecological thinking to apply it as the question is being raised in the literature or anything, I don't see any relation to in that context. So it is more of deep ecological thinking is more of questioning oneself deep down, that is to evoke a sense of an ecocentric ideas within oneself, and therefore such forms of evoking or engaging a deep ecological awareness within therefore could to some extent address the environmental problems which are being unfolding or which we are confronted with. So therefore, because it tries to recognize that every sentient beings has to some extent have their own rights of existence. So therefore, we need to respect that. So otherwise, because from the anthropocentric point of view, we often tend to see that human is above all this, and then we often try to override and then try to brush aside the other forms of life. So deep ecology should also be understood in terms of where we give a space to others, treat others equally, and therefore it is based on that notions of biocentricity, and which also evokes a sense of ecological justice, which treat. And as I have also mentioned that in one of the interview, Arnines has rightly pointed out that what deep ecology is all about, simple in means, rich in ends. So that sort of epithet actually is one of the underlying characters which sort of underlines the important essence of what deep ecology is all about. So in a way, we can say that deep ecology also negates the idea of exploitations, the idea of subjugations, the idea of where we try to give utmost importance to human alone, and then thereby what Murray Bookchin talk about in social ecology, that the way we relate ourselves with nature, the way we conceive and perceive nature, is also reflected in the way in which we treat our fellow human beings. So therefore, it all lies within us of the way in which we try to, look our worldview, our attitudes toward nature is very much concentrated within these notions. So I'll stop here and then thank you all, and I hope to interact with you all soon again in our next meeting. So please try to do the assignment, weekly assignment on time, as it is also very much part of the assessment. Thank you all. Have a nice day.